June 5, 2021, a summer afternoon at OceanWorld Marine Park. Families gathered for what was billed as a landmark celebration, the 300th live performance by senior Orca trainer Emily Cadeaux. But within minutes, joy turned to horror. As the audience cheered, an 11,000-pound orca named Vesper broke formation. What followed was a display of raw power and primal instinct, a captive predator reclaiming its nature. In full view of 2,500 stunned spectators, Emily was dragged beneath the surface. She would never resurface alive. They say when you keep a storm in a bottle, don't be surprised when it shatters. For years, warning signs were ignored. And on that day, the bottle finally broke. If you're new to this channel, welcome. We investigate the untold stories behind animal attacks that change history. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the truth is more brutal than you can imagine. Emily Cadeaux was just 24 years old when her life ended in the most brutal way imaginable. Born and raised in Sarasota, she grew up a short drive from the marine park she would later call home. From the time she was a child, she was fascinated by the ocean. Not just by its beauty, but by the creatures that called it home. While most girls her age hung posters of pop stars on their walls, Emily had pictures of orcas, dolphins, and coral reefs. At 19, she secured a coveted internship at OceanWorld Marine Park, a stepping stone into a world she had dreamed about for years. By 21, she was a full-time trainer, and by 23, she had been promoted to senior orca handler, a title rarely awarded to someone so young, and one that came with immense responsibility. But Emily wasn't just any trainer. She was the one other staff members went to when things got tense with the animals. According to co-workers, she had a gift, a kind of calm that even the most unpredictable orcas seemed to respond to. She was the one who bonded with Vesper better than anyone, one fellow trainer would later recall. There were times when he'd ignore all of us, and then she'd walk in, and he'd surface like he was waiting just for her. It was a relationship built on trust, or at least that's what everyone thought. Emily believed in her work, believed in the possibility of harmony between humans and these massive predators. But as the saying goes, you can teach a lion tricks, but never forget it still remembers the hunt. And Vesper, he never forgot. OceanWorld Marine Park has been a staple of marine entertainment since it opened in 1986. The park drew in over 1.2 million visitors each year, offering attractions that showcase the power and beauty of the ocean's most magnificent creatures. Families traveled from all over the world to witness the wonders of dolphins performing tricks, sea lions leaping through rings of fire, and orcas in breathtaking aerial stunts. But beneath the surface, things weren't as picturesque as they seemed. OceanWorld's Orca program had long been a point of contention, a focus on spectacle that masked the ethical and emotional cost of keeping these giant predators in captivity. For years, animal rights groups had protested the park's practices, but OceanWorld remained steadfast. The public loved the shows and the profits rolled in. It seemed as though nothing could shake the foundation of this marine empire. But that foundation was crumbling. Despite the success, the park's Orca program was slowly declining. Audiences were turning away, and internal reports started to surface, showing that the orcas' behavior was changing. They were becoming unpredictable. Their training routines were less precise, their performances more erratic. It was the beginning of the end, but few were willing to acknowledge the danger brewing beneath the surface. Then there was Vesper. Vesper wasn't just another orca in the lineup. He was one of the largest and most powerful animals ever kept at OceanWorld. A 6-ton bull orca, his size alone commanded respect. He was born in captivity, which many believed had shaped his aggressive tendencies. His mother had died during transport when he was just a calf, a traumatic experience that left Vesper with a deep, unresolved pain, one that was never properly addressed. He had never known the open ocean, only the confines of his tank. While many of the orcas at OceanWorld had been bred in captivity for generations, Vesper's birth was particularly controversial. His mother had died in transit, and as a result, Vesper had never received the necessary emotional and physical bonding that orcas typically experience in the wild. It's said that orcas, especially males, formed tight familial bonds. When that bond was broken so violently at such a young age, Vesper's behavior became unpredictable, almost impossible to read. He was known to be temperamental. Some days he would perform beautifully, swimming alongside trainers in flawless synchronicity, the crowd cheering as the two seemed to move as one. But other days his eyes would grow distant, his movements sharp and jerky, his aggression barely held in check. It was as though he was holding a grudge against the world, against the life he had been forced into. In the days leading up to Emily's final show, Vesper's behavior had become increasingly erratic. Trainers had noticed him becoming more distant, more isolated. One trainer reported that during a routine session just days before the attack, Vesper had refused to follow any commands, swimming in tight circles and slapping his tail against the water in frustration. His mood was darker, as though something had shifted in him. Emily had noticed these changes too, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But like so many others, she pushed those concerns aside, hoping it was just a phase, that Vesper would settle back into his usual routine. She'd trained him for years, after all. She knew him better than anyone. But the thing about a wild animal is, no matter how much you think you understand it, its instincts are always lurking just beneath the surface. The truth is, no amount of training can ever change that. As the saying goes, you can chain an animal, but you can't chain its spirit. And Vesper's spirit was beginning to rebel. In the weeks leading up to the fateful performance, Emily had started to notice troubling signs in Vesper. Small at first, like cracks forming in a dam that hadn't yet burst. It began during the morning training sessions. Vesper's movements had become erratic, more aggressive. Emily couldn't ignore the way he slapped his tail against the water, creating loud, violent splashes that sent ripples through the tank. It wasn't the playful action he had once used to communicate excitement or anticipation. This was a warning, a subtle but clear sign of agitation. His behavior was becoming less predictable. On some days, he would perform flawlessly, executing every maneuver with precision. On others, he seemed distracted, disinterested in the commands Emily gave him. It was almost as though he was testing the boundaries of his relationship with her. He would refuse to swim on cue, ignoring her commands, and swim circles in the farthest corner of the pool, as if waiting for something. His eyes, once calm and almost affectionate, had turned cold, distant. Emily could feel it. Something was off, but it wasn't just his refusal to perform that alarmed her. He started charging the underwater gates. It was a dangerous behavior, one that had been seen in other orcas who had grown frustrated with captivity. Charging the gates wasn't just a sign of aggression, it was a sign of desperation. Vesper wanted out. His massive body would slam into the steel barriers, rattling the entire pool, creating a loud, deafening noise that echoed through the walls of the training area. It was a primal instinct, an attempt to break free, to escape the confines of a life he didn't choose. Emily tried to bring her concerns to her superiors. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Vesper's behavior was escalating. She wrote up a detailed report, documenting the tail slaps, the aggression toward the gates, and his refusal to cooperate with training. She highlighted the risks. She stressed that Vesper wasn't the same orca he had been months ago. She went so far as to say he was dangerous. "He's not safe to work with," she wrote in an email sent directly to the senior management team. She detailed the risks, explained that it wasn't just a phase, and that they needed to reconsider allowing Vesper to perform during the upcoming summer show. Emily knew this wasn't just a training issue, this was a matter of safety, but the response she received wasn't what she expected. "He just needs more stimulation," one of the senior managers wrote back. "Let's not cause panic before the summer launch. We can manage his behavior." It was a dismissal, a cold, calculated response that reflected the priorities of the park. Money, spectacle, the show must go on. Vesper's aggressive behavior was swept aside, chalked up to an animal simply needing more enrichment. The management insisted that the show was already sold out, that the park couldn't afford to have a negative story leak to the press just weeks before the summer launch. They promised Emily they would keep an eye on Vesper, but the decision was made. The show would go on as planned. Emily wasn't convinced. Stimulation wasn't the answer. Vesper needed something far more important than distractions. He needed space, freedom, the opportunity to be an orca, not a performer. But in the world of OceanWorld, freedom wasn't a luxury the animals could afford. As the saying goes, the louder the bark, the harder the bite. Vesper's behavior had gone from a warning to a full-blown threat, but instead of addressing the problem, those in charge chose to ignore it, until it was too late. The summer sun blazed down on OceanWorld Marine Park that afternoon. The park was packed to capacity, with 2,500 guests eagerly awaiting the 300th live performance of the summer. It was the peak of the season, and the air was thick with excitement and anticipation. The audience had no idea that the day would soon turn into a nightmare. Emily had been preparing for this performance for weeks. She had worked with Vesper countless times, and though she had noticed his increasingly erratic behavior, she had no choice but to trust that he would perform as expected. After all, she had done it 100 times before. She stepped into the main pool, wearing her wetsuit, a slight smile on her face, though in the back of her mind, something felt off. But she pushed the nagging thought aside. Today was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone in her career. Nothing would go wrong. The show began, the crowd roaring as Vesper and Emily swam in synchrony. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. The orca's powerful body cutting through the water with graceful precision, the audience mesmerized by the bond they shared. Emily's heart swelled with pride as she performed the carefully rehearsed moves. But as the final act approached, a high-energy synchronized finale, Vesper's demeanor shifted. Witnesses later recounted what happened next in shocking detail. "He broke formation," one spectator said. "He swam behind her, and then he just lunged." In an instant, the orca that Emily had trusted like a companion for years snapped. He seized her by the waist with his massive jaws, thrashing her violently through the water, spinning her like a rag doll. The force was beyond anything Emily could have anticipated. She couldn't break free. Her body was no match for the strength of the 6-ton predator. The audience breathed heavily, unsure of what was happening at first. But as the thrashing continued, panic set in. Screams filled the air as the reality of the situation dawned. The staff scrambled into action, but they were too far away to reach her in time. The park's emergency protocols kicked in. The lifeguards attempted a rescue, using buzzers and nets to distract Vesper, but it was futile. The orca's grip on Emily tightened, and despite their efforts, he refused to release her. As the chaos unfolded, the crowd began to evacuate, but many were rooted in place, unable to look away from the horrifying scene in front of them. Those who were closest to the pool could see the blood starting to mix with the water, the once clear pool now tainted with crimson streaks. The water churned violently as Vesper continued to thrash, dragging Emily deeper beneath the surface. Every twist of his massive body was like a knife slicing through the water. Emily's lifeless body was tossed around like a rag doll. The staff, now desperate, used everything at their disposal. More nets, more distractions, but it wasn't enough. Vesper wasn't listening. He wasn't obeying. He was not the same orca Emily had trained, the orca who had performed with her in countless shows. No, this was something else. An animal driven by pure instinct, a force of nature reclaiming control. As Emily was pulled further under the surface, the audience's worst fears were confirmed. Blood filled the pool, staining the water in a macabre display. The once celebratory atmosphere of the show had turned to sheer terror. In the end, it was too late. By the time the rescue teams could reach the pool and pull Vesper away, Emily Cadeaux was already gone. Some say that when an animal turns on its handler, it is a reflection of the animal's captivity. A sudden, explosive release of all the frustrations, all the pain, and all the longing for freedom that had been building for years. They say you can cage the beast, but you can never tame its heart. And on that day, Vesper's heart broke free. The chaos didn't stop when Emily's body was finally released from Vesper's grip. In those agonizing moments, the trainers, desperate to save her, continued to act on instinct, reaching for anything they could use to bring the orca under control. They threw fish buckets into the water, hoping to distract Vesper, to coax him away long enough to retrieve Emily's lifeless form. They tried recall devices, whistles, claps, anything to break the hold he had on the water's surface. But Vesper's fury was too great. He was no longer the trained animal they had known. He had become something else entirely. The trainers and staff worked in a panic, their hearts racing with the realization that every second was another second too late. Every moment they waited, the chances of Emily surviving slipped further away. The audience, still frozen in shock and fear, was evacuated from the arena, but no one could look away. The horror was unfolding before their very eyes. It took 29 long minutes for rescue teams to retrieve Emily's body from the water. In those agonizing minutes, the staff could only hope. Hope that something could be done. Hope that the worst hadn't happened. Hope that Emily might somehow be saved. But when paramedics finally reached her, their worst fears were confirmed. The cold, clinical confirmation of death sent a shudder through the entire team. Emily Cadeaux, the bright young woman who had dedicated her life to these animals, was gone. The paramedics could only pronounce her dead on sight. There was no chance to revive her. But the truth, the painful reality, didn't stop there. An autopsy was conducted the following day, and the findings sent shockwaves through OceanWorld and the entire marine community. Emily had suffered multiple blunt force trauma injuries, likely from the powerful strikes of Vesper's tail and the violent thrashing that had occurred underwater. These kinds of injuries were consistent with the sheer force that an orca could exert. The sheer power of a 6-ton orca's body slamming into its prey was enough to cause internal bleeding, broken bones, and unimaginable pain. But perhaps the most harrowing discovery came from the autopsy report. Emily had drowned. Despite being pulled from the water, the damage had been done. Vesper had held her down, keeping her submerged in the depths for too long, and in an even more grotesque revelation, the autopsy found significant partial tissue loss on her legs and shoulder. Damage that confirmed Vesper's bite had been not only powerful, but incredibly forceful. It was clear now that Vesper had not simply attacked Emily. He had torn at her with the instinct of a wild animal, driven by rage and frustration that had built up over the years in captivity. The loss was profound. A young woman with so much promise, so much love for the creatures she worked with, had been taken in an instant. Those who knew Emily, her co-workers, her friends, were left to pick up the pieces, trying to make sense of a tragedy that seemed impossible. As the saying goes, the sea takes what it wants when it wants. But this wasn't a story of the sea taking its due. This was a story of captivity, of broken trust, and of a creature so long imprisoned, so long misunderstood, that it snapped. It was the story of how one tragic moment could change everything. The hours following Emily Cadeaux's death were a blur of activity, confusion, and frantic attempts to control the narrative. As the world learned of the attack, OceanWorld Marine Park, its management, and its PR team sprang into action. The park's response was swift, but its message was carefully constructed. By the time the evening news cycle began, OceanWorld issued a press statement. The words were calm, measured, designed to downplay the magnitude of what had transpired. A tragic accident during a training demonstration, the statement read. The phrasing was deliberate, framing the event as an unfortunate mishap, an unpredictable accident that could not have been foreseen. There was no mention of the red flags that had been raised by Emily, no acknowledgement of the escalating signs of aggression from Vesper in the weeks leading up to the attack, no mention of the emails she had sent to management, warning them of the risks, no mention of the very real danger that had been brushed aside. A tragic accident, they said. And just like that, the story was told, one that deflected responsibility and attempted to shield the park from scrutiny. But behind the scenes, things were not as simple as the press release made them seem. In the weeks that followed, whispers began to circulate. Some of the staff, troubled by the way the park had handled the situation, started to leak information. Whistleblower emails began to surface, sent anonymously to journalists and investigators. The emails were damning. One email in particular sent shockwaves through the industry. It read, "They deleted all behavior reports from Vesper's file. Everything that was flagged about his aggression, all the documented signs of stress, gone. They made sure it would never be part of the record. They don't want anyone to know how bad it really was. The revelation hit like a tidal wave. The truth, buried under layers of corporate denial, was finally starting to come to light. Vesper had shown warning signs, clear, undeniable signs of aggression, but instead of taking action, management had ignored them. They had erased the evidence to protect their investment, to protect the brand, and to protect their profits. But despite the growing public outcry, the story didn't play out the way many had hoped. The government quickly launched an inquiry into Emily's death, but it was clear from the start that the investigation was not going to be as thorough as many had expected. The park's lawyers worked tirelessly to control the flow of information, and despite the growing evidence of negligence, the government's inquiry concluded with a weak statement. No criminal charges will be filed in connection with the incident. It was an easy conclusion, one that allowed the park to walk away without consequence. The inquiry, which many hoped would bring accountability, instead fizzled out, leaving the public with more questions than answers. In the wake of the attack, Vesper was placed in an isolation tank, far from the audience, far from the shows. He was no longer a performer, but his punishment was not for the death of Emily. It was a symbolic act, a way to show the public that something had been done. Vesper was removed from the spotlight, but he remained a prisoner in his own right, locked away in a solitary cell, far from the freedom he had once known in the wild. As the adage goes, a leopard doesn't change its spots, and though Vesper was now alone, the scars of captivity ran deep. No matter how much they tried to conceal the truth, it was clear to those who knew the full story that the death of Emily Cadeaux was not just a tragic accident. It was the result of years of neglect, corporate greed, and a system that valued spectacle over the well-being of the animals it exploited. OceanWorld moved forward, its shows continuing, its profits soaring, but the shadow of that day, the blood in the water, would linger in the hearts of those who knew what had really happened. And for Emily's family, her friends and her co-workers, the nightmare was far from over. 2 months after the attack, OceanWorld's live orca shows were quietly and abruptly ended. The park made no public announcement, no grand gesture. It was as if the incident had never occurred, swept under the rug in the hope that the public's memory would fade. But for those who had witnessed the horrific events of June 5th, the memory lingered like a scar, a reminder that some things could never be erased. Behind the scenes, Vesper's future was sealed in secrecy. The once celebrated Orca, the star of countless performances, was moved to an off-site veterinary facility in the dead of night. The park's management tried to make it seem like a routine transfer, a necessary precaution for his rehabilitation. But the truth was far more threatening. The move was part of a careful attempt to distance the park from the disaster that had unfolded. Vesper was no longer part of their public-facing operations, no longer a symbol of their marine park success. As Vesper was hidden away, rumors began to surface. Whispers spread among the staff, carried on the wind like a storm brewing on the horizon. Anonymous employees began to leak information about the orca's behavior after the attack, painting a picture far darker than the park would ever admit. One email described an incident that sent chills through those who read it. He attacked a male trainer during feeding in July. The trainer was lucky to escape, but Vesper's aggression has only intensified. He's become a time bomb. No one knows when he'll explode again. The unsettling truth was that Vesper's aggression had only worsened in isolation. The orca, who had once been trained to perform and bond with humans, was now a ticking time bomb, his frustration boiling over in the confines of captivity. But OceanWorld didn't want this to be part of the narrative. They didn't want the world to know how much damage had been done, not just to Emily, but to the animal as well. Vesper was becoming a symbol of what happens when an animal is pushed too far, and OceanWorld had no intention of letting that story see the light of day. As the months passed, the public's curiosity about Vesper's fate grew. The park remained tight-lipped, offering no details about what had happened to the orca. Some said Vesper had been euthanized, put down to prevent any further incidents. Others claimed that he had been transferred abroad, shipped to another facility where his behavior might be ignored or hidden from view. The truth, like so many things in the aftermath of the attack, became a mystery. In the end, Vesper's fate mirrored the tragedy of captivity itself. He was a prisoner, locked away in the shadows, his once powerful presence relegated to rumors and speculation. Out of sight, out of mind, some would say. But those who knew the truth understood that the scars left behind by Emily's death and the treatment of Vesper could never be so easily forgotten. The public's reaction to Emily Cadeaux's tragic death was nothing short of explosive. What began as a whispered tragedy soon became an undeniable storm, one that would shake the very foundation of OceanWorld and the marine park industry as a whole. It started on social media. Tweets, posts, hashtags like #Justice for Emily quickly gaining traction. People from all walks of life, from animal rights activists to ordinary citizens, began to demand accountability. The hashtag became a rallying cry, one that echoed across the world, reaching every corner of the internet. The anger was detectable, and the grief was raw. How could this have happened, they asked. Why was Emily's warning ignored? The backlash grew stronger with each passing day. Animal rights channels on YouTube and national news outlets gave extensive coverage to the story, amplifying the voices of those calling for change. Activists who had long criticized the captivity of marine mammals now had a tragic story to highlight. They used Emily's death as a symbol, a turning point in the battle for orca freedom, and the message was clear. Enough was enough. One of the most powerful responses came in the form of a petition calling for an end to captive orca performances. It wasn't long before the petition gained over 1.4 million signatures. People from across the world, many who had never even set foot in a marine park, added their names, their voices, in solidarity with Emily and with all the animals trapped in captivity. OceanWorld, once a booming empire, soon felt the financial impact of the public outcry. Their stock dropped sharply, a reflection of the growing discontent with the park's practices. Visitors, once eager to buy tickets and take part in the shows, now began to stay away. The world was watching, and the tide was turning. Soon after, marine mammal shows across the country began to shut down. Other parks, seeing the writing on the wall, quietly scaled back their orca performances. The public had made its stance clear, and it was a blow from which the industry would not easily recover. As the saying goes, what's done in the dark will always come to light, and for OceanWorld, the darkness had been exposed. The death of Emily Cadeaux became a turning point, a call for change that could not be ignored. The legacy of Emily, though painful, had sparked a movement that would continue to grow, a movement that demanded an end to the exploitation of orcas in captivity. Emily Cadeaux died doing what she loved, but her death exposed the grim reality of marine mammal captivity. Her story is a warning. Even trained predators remain wild. They may be tamed for a time, but the instinct to be free, the power to fight back, cannot be suppressed forever. Her death is a tragedy, but it is not the end of the story. It is a turning point, a reminder that the exploitation of animals for entertainment has consequences. The captivity of these magnificent creatures is not just a threat to their safety, it's a threat to the safety of those who interact with them too. If you believe that animals deserve to live free from captivity, join the fight for their freedom. Subscribe, like, and share this video to help spread the message. Together, we can make a difference. Thanks for watching.